Yeah, I know. Okay. Yes, I'm getting there. I'm just recording. Okay, so we said that's competitive exclusion. Competitive exclusion is when one species just can't compete, and they end up pushed out of their habitat, they die off in that area, they can't get enough resources, whether it's food, whether it's nesting sites, whether it's shelter. This is basically a game of musical chairs. How many of you have played musical chairs? And every single time one more chair gets taken away, and whoever doesn't get a seat was excluded. Excluded! That's competitive exclusion. You're competing over that limited number of chairs. And in all cases here, if you are the more efficient predator, whether you are an herbivore and your prey are plants, whether you are a carnivore or an omnivore, when you're the more efficient organism at getting what you need, you win. You know, this is where nature is kind of ruthless. So we talked, and this is I think where we left off yesterday. We talked about generalists and specialists several chapters ago. And a generalist has a broad niche. So humans are great generalists. We can eat just about anything. We can live just about any place. We can, change our behavior to fit the environment. What was the big specialist we talked about? You remember? There's one organism that we very specifically talked about that is an incredible specialist. Like they only eat one thing. Pandas. Yeah, great pandas. They're an Asian species, and they eat bamboo, and that's all they eat. And they only live in places where specific species of bamboo grows. Because bamboo is just like the grass in your yard. Do you know that there are hundreds of species of grasses? And if you have pasture, you're more likely to know that. There's orchard grass and timothy and whatever else. Well, there are hundreds of species of bamboo, and pandas can only eat one of them.
It's like the most common grass.
What's the most common grass? Oh, it depends on where you're at. In yards, probably fescue or something, bluegrass, all kinds of species. If you've got something competing with pandas and something else is eating that bamboo, do pandas have a plan B?
No. There's
no fallback for them. If something is competing, so my bear people was, eagle. Who's my bear? Is Austin my only bear? Did we establish this yesterday? Okay. But we found in looking at stuff, and coyotes are another great example. So coyotes, listed as carnivores, but are they real selective carnivores? Like, do they only eat bunnies? No. Rabbits, mice, baby birds, house cats, small dogs, something in the garbage, possum carcasses on the road, anything, you name it, they'll eat it. Baby deer? Sure. Work to pull down something a little bit larger? Sure. Come across a ground nest of eggs? Will you eat that? Sure. So they're much more opportunistic. They have a much broader niche. They can eat a wider variety of things. Coyotes can live in an incredibly broad variety of places. I have a friend who lives in Cleveland, and she talks about seeing a coyote at night in her neighborhood. And this is like dense, urban Cleveland. They can live in, they can nest in hollow logs. They can dig themselves a burrow. They can live in a highway underpass. They can live in an old abandoned building. They're incredibly flexible. If you're a specialist and you compete with a generalist, guess who wins? Yeah, generalists okay, you're going to eat that? Fine, I'll just eat this. You're going to sleep there? Fine, I'll just sleep there. You're going to reproduce at this time of year and use up all the resources? Fine. The more adaptable you are, the more likely you are to be successful. Question, comment?
They found coyotes in the park in New York City.
Yes. There are coyotes in the middle of Manhattan, in the middle of dense urban New York. They can live anywhere. They can live anywhere from the desert to the Southwest to the urban jungle of New York. They can live in downtown Cleveland. They can live in Columbiana County, Ohio. They can live anywhere. They are just incredibly adaptable. They're a generalist. And if you have a generalist going head-to-head with a specialist, if that generalist gets competed against on one thing, they can go to something else. Generalists thrive. And I'm going to say that this is actually a life lesson for you guys, too. You know the expression, jack of all trades, master of none? It's not such a bad thing. Being a generalist is good. If you can do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that, and you can blend those skills, that's a really good way to go through your life. Being generally handy is often better than being able to do one thing really well and only that thing. Like, it's better to be a generalist. Okay, so that's competitive exclusion. That's where one species gets pushed out altogether. And that's where we said competition can change a community. Because if we go all the way back to the first part of this notes, we listed, 20 or 30 species that are in a community. There might be hundreds or thousands of species in a community. Competition can push some of those species out. Now, competition doesn't just change communities. Competition also changes the species itself. So over many, many generations, a species will change to avoid competition. I'll give you a moment to copy that. We've got three species here, 3 species of warblers. This is not a goldfinch. You see goldfinches around here all year. This is a different bird. It's a little bit bigger than a goldfinch, and its wing is not as dark. And warblers have got beautiful, beautiful songs. These are birds that out in the forest just make you so happy. And that's a yellow warbler, and that's a cerulean warbler, and that one is a black and white warbler. Not all that creative in naming, but that's what they are. And they, yeah, the blue one. Well, cerulean's actually a color of blue. It's a shade, but not many people are familiar with that word. So yeah, it could just be called a blue warbler. But and a lot of these little tiny birds are down in South America over the winter. And I mean, we're talking about these birds are like this big. They're little teeny tiny things. And they fly all the way from Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Indiana and Iowa and like up here in the Midwest. And they fly all the way to South and Central America. And they live there in the winter. And then they come up here in the spring and they breed here. Their babies are born here. And by the time their babies are a few months old, the whole family flies back to South America together. And they stay there the rest of the year. So these 3 species of warblers all nest and forage in pine trees, evergreen trees. That's kind of a problem because they're all eating similar stuff and they all have similar requirements for nesting habitats. And what was discovered, some wonderful crazy biologist went out and looked at exactly where they are nesting and where they are looking for food. And I will probably get the order wrong on this, but that's okay. What they found is that one species uses the very tops of the trees. And they nest and they forage in the very tops of the trees. And one species uses more of the middle of the trees. And one species, you guessed it, uses the bottom of the trees. And they have, did they come to some agreement? Did they sign a treaty? No. But over many, many, many generations, yellow warblers just kept moving up a little bit. Hey, you know what? There's fewer of everybody else up here. Go higher. Until all yellow warblers nest and hunt up in the tops of trees. And over many generations, these cerulean warblers, hey, don't just stay where you are. The yellows seem to be moving out. And so now ceruleans tend to congregate in the middles of the trees, and the black and whites tend to congregate down low. And this is called resource partitioning. So they've to partition. Do you know what it means to partition? How many of you have had to share a room with a sibling? At any age. And sometimes it's when you're really, really little, and as you get older, you get your own room. Any issues arise when you're sharing a room with a sibling? I've heard that it can lead to some conflicts in terms of competition over shared resources. I have heard of siblings putting a line of duct tape down the middle of the room. Like, this is your half of the room, and this is my half of the room. And if you step your foot over this, I'm going to beat the tar out of you. I've heard of this. That's partitioning a bedroom. You are blocking it off into sections that you each get to use. Resource partitioning is just doing the same thing with a resource out in the wild. So these birds have, in essence, divvied up the tree. There's no duct tape line, but over many generations, all the little yellow warblers just learn that this is where we nest, this is where we hunt. Nope, don't go down there. Nope, stay up here. Nope, don't go down there. Stay up here. And they've just divided up the resource. So what that means is that all three of these species get to stay in that community. They're no longer competing with one another. They have divided the resource up, and so they all have enough. Okay, questions, comments, concerns?